These recluses, sons of the Sakyans, have great desires. They are not contented. It is not easy to present them with robes. Namaste. What? I'll explain. Welcome back. This is Edward Reeb's Buddhist Books Podcast, episode 96, Tipiṭaka part 35, in which I will be reciting Nissaggiya, right? Parts 8 and 9. If this is your first time seeing me, do click here. That will take you to the Tipiṭaka playlist. You can start with episode 1. I would like to welcome our special guests, Shiva and Shivaji, Lord Shiva. Now, it can be a little confusing because Shivaji sounds an awful lot like a respectful way of referring to Lord Shiva. Because you say Shiva, you say, people might say Edward G when they're being respectful. So to say Shiva G is like a respectful way of referring to Shiva, right? Well, it turns out it can be a little confusing. For example, if you go to Maharashtra and you hang out with these guys, and you go to this temple, you might walk away with the impression that Shivaji, the king of Maharashtra from about 800 or 900 years ago, I don't know exactly when did the Mongols
rule China?
I don't know. I just work here.
Anyway, that's a Bill and Ted thing. So anyway, when I went to Maharashtra, I went to this temple, and everything was covered in turmeric. And I swear to whoever that they told me that king was an avatar of Shiva. In fact, I walked away with the impression that he was the second avatar of Shiva. I posted as much on my Instagram at the time, and nobody corrected me. Shiva is said to have had 24 avatars, and just now, I found out that Shivaji, the king of Maharashtra, who fought off Genghis Khan, which is quite a thing to do, was not considered one of them, as far as I can tell. But I don't know, sometimes people get ideas, and it's kind of interesting. I want to remind you that I'm not a teacher. I'm not claiming to be a teacher. I'm reading these words to you. These words themselves have authority. The stuff I say when I'm not reading is just the stuff that's in here, which has as much value as it has, but it doesn't have the same value as someone with a PhD in a college somewhere teaching comparative religion. That's pretty clear, right? So, I do my best. I share anecdotes, and I share kind of like my experiences from living in India and traveling and that kind of thing. For example, you might run into people in Maharashtra who claim that this is an avatar of Lord Shiva. Again, it's not. So there are two people here. One is a god, one is a man. People might theorize that Shiva at one time was a man, or that he incarnated 24 times as a man. But he is a god. He's one of the three main gods of Vedic Hinduism. He's said to be the destroyer in sort of an oversimplified Cliff Notes version of Hinduism that it sort of is common in the West. But I haven't really, he has one aspect in which he is the destroyer. What's that? What's that? little thing that's over here, that is the song that's attributed to the dance that Shiva does at the end of every Kali Yuga age. So there's this idea that there's these ages. You've probably heard people talk about Kali Yuga. Now, this goes back to a game of dice or nuts, a game of nuts, where people would throw these nuts, and then depending on how they landed, it was one of four different hands, one of four different throws. The worst one that you could throw was the Kali throw. And so with that in mind, someone came up with the four ages, the four yugas, these long periods that often last for millions of years. In the case of Kali Yuga, it lasts for 450,000 years. And it began something like 3,500 BC, and it will end in about another, 445,000 years. And so when people talk about it's Kali Yuga, and they're kind of coming from having been raised Christian and had this idea that the apocalypse is coming any minute, and then they become yogis and New Agers, and then they just change that for Kali Yuga and think that Kali Yuga is just something that's been happening since the Industrial Revolution, or perhaps since, I don't know, Reagan or whatever. Yeah, not quite. It's sort of just generally speaking the era that we're in. Humanity was around before it, but civilized humans, not so much. All of civilization, all of recorded history, you could say, takes place within Kali Yuga, if you're into the yugas. Okay, what am I talking about? At the end of Kali Yuga, there's some big destruction thing, which if you're still alive in about 450,000 years, then you'll get to witness Shiva doing that dance while that song is playing, according to tradition. And that will destroy all the corruption in which the sacred has become profane and the profane has become sacred. And people might go, oh, sounds like woke culture to me, and you can fuck off, I'm sorry. But anyway, not the woke culture, the people who think that, who equate these two things. So that's my personal opinion, by the way. A lot of people, I don't know. There's like there's a Vesica Pisces where you have like these sort of right-wing, fascists on one hand, and you have like New Age and Vajrayana Buddhism and yoga, and there's the people who assume that the two go together and that there's some kind of relationship between the two. I'm more on the other side of that. I assume that there's a correlation between being a decent person and a little bit more of a leftist and being a spiritual person. An assumption which, having grown and discovered that how the other half think, I've come to kind of go, that's weird. But I'm definitely not the sort that thinks, well, I better not talk about anything sensitive or political or I'm going to lose half of my audience. I don't care if I lose half of my audience. I'm going to be real with you guys. So there you have it. That's where I'm coming from. Aside from all that, in a few days, 4 to be specific, Priyal and I are going to be going away, and I will continue to record and upload these episodes, but I've noticed that when I don't have this background behind me, when I have some kind of tropical thing or a hotel room, the videos don't get as they get like 14 views and 0 to 1 likes. Where I don't know, people seem to like this and the guests. I don't know. So yeah, I might be going a little nuts with the guests here. I was actually thinking. I don't know who to have for a special guest for today, and then this happened. And then at the end of that, some people were saying hi to me, and I replied with
Hare Krishna.
And my beautiful wife Priyal pointed out to me that they were devotees of Lord Shiva, not Hare Krishnas from the local ISKCON temple, and I was rather embarrassed. One of the roles that Priyal plays in my life is she's sort of my ongoing guide here in India. So yeah, she helps to correct me with some of these things. Like, for example, when I was talking about, who's the second avatar of Shiva, the one who was the king in Maharashtra? And she said, what are you talking about? And then I looked it up and came to discover that, yeah, that's not true. So just because something comes out of my mouth because I heard it somewhere doesn't mean it's true. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, I guess. When I was in Nepal about 4 years ago, I remember I met the Goyal family, and I remember Ajay telling me that the Dalai Lama was the king of Buddhism. And I tried to explain, that about Theravada and how Vajrayana, from a certain perspective, can barely be called Buddhism. And certainly the Dalai Lama is not the king of it. And the lineage that he is part of, sure, he is the head of that, or you might say the king of that. And he used to have a role that was a lot like being the king of Tibet before the Chinese took over. And then the government in exile, he's sort of the king of that, you might say. But not the king of Buddhism. That's kind of a different thing. That's sort of like saying that Donald Trump was the president of Christianity for 4 years, or someone in a PM in Israel is the prime minister of Judaism or something. It's not reality. It's not a truism. I could make one more example, but I hesitate to because I live here. But let's just say that there are sacred things and religious doctrines which extend far beyond the borders of any kind of nationalistic version of them. That's all I'm saying, just in general. That all being said, he says nervously, have I talked enough about this? This is a Shiva ling. This is the most ancient form of Shiva, you might say. I don't know if this was always there, but this is a pretty, a replica of a pretty ancient symbol. This is meant to be, the female sexual organ, and this is the male sexual organ. And for the folks out there who are like, man, I missed when this guy was into Western esotericism, you might be familiar with the Arthur Edward Waite, the one who was too Christian for Crowley. He included the Shiva ling in the chariot card right here, as painted, of course, by Pamela Coleman Smith, though from what I understand, he was kind of designing it and she was painting it, but, I don't want to get into all that. So yes, you might recognize this if you've seen Bahubali. I definitely am not gonna. Well, I think I was able to play some of the music from that, but it's like banned in Iran, Syria, Cuba, and North Korea. Sorry to my viewers in those 4 countries. You won't be able to hear the music from that. But anyway, so that's that. Oh, and here's one more thing. So that is the music I use on our sister podcast, To Be a Yogi. And that particular musician, he says slowly to make sure that there's a good solid 12 or 17 seconds or whatever it is in between YouTube cards, is named Brian Dahl. And there's an interview with him, which some of you should not listen to, but others, probably would enjoy it. What else? There's a lot. So I became a yoga teacher, started that podcast To Be a Yogi, prompted by wanting to be able to meditate properly and to sit in lotus position. And as I sort of looked at the various Buddhist documents, the sutras and what have you, and all of that, I came to I want to say realization, but I'll just say I came to the conclusion that yoga would be the best path for me to learn how to meditate in the best possible way, in order to follow in the footsteps of Buddha in the best possible way, in the spirit of Dogen, Dogen, the Zen master. And listening to a lot of Alan Watts lectures back in the day, the way he put it was Lord Buddha was a yogi, that he was practicing yoga. He would do his yoga stretches, which came around in the 1500s, Common Era. But anyway, all those 24 in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Anyway. And a couple of anecdotes. One anecdote I wanted to share was when I went to Nepal, I had already been a yoga teacher at that time for 4 years in California. And I ended up, there was one point where I went to, I think, Baseri and did my yoga every day at this little Shiva temple, Shiva shrine up there with a beautiful view of the mountains. And when I went on the Annapurna Base Camp trek, I noticed at the top that there were these, what are they called? Okay, I'm so sorry. I'll write it up here. That's the name of that. Trident? It's not a trident, it's the three-pronged thing that Shiva carries. And they would have Tibetan flags with that symbol. In Nepal, there's, as I mentioned in the previous episode, Tibetan Buddhism or Tantric Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism is already kind of a blending of Hinduism with Buddhism. But there are a lot of people in Nepal who would identify as being religiously Hindu. They were raised Hindu, they practice Hinduism, their family's Hindu, they do all the Hindu things, but they've chosen the path of Buddhism, Vajrayana Buddhism. And so that essence, that current, you might say, exists in Nepal to a great extent. And for a while, when I was planning to build a yoga studio, I wanted to have that Shiva symbol with the Vajrayana banners. But anyway, so I ended up teaching yoga at a studio in Kathmandu, and the founder and owner of that studio, he had an interesting perspective. He came from a yogi family that also practiced Tantra, Tantra, sorry, my pronunciations aren't so good. And he would often tell me that he didn't understand why all these Westerners would come to Kathmandu, and they were always talking about Tantric Buddhism. They wanted to learn about Tantric Buddhism, and he would say, Tantra has nothing whatsoever to do with Buddhism. What kind of ignoramus are you? And okay. I would say I hear what you're saying, and I understand why you're saying that. However, as Tantra was developing within Hinduism, it also influenced Mahayana Buddhism, and the product of that was Vajrayana Buddhism, which if you look everywhere, all around, see that stupa, see that flag, see that monk, see that? That's Tantric Buddhism. That's Vajrayana / Tantric Buddhism. So, yeah. Don't know what to tell you, and I don't know if that ever sunk in. But, yeah, so he would often talk about how there's the yoga path on one hand, and there's the tantric path on the other hand, and that Buddha was on the yoga path. That was the path of asceticism, the path of abstinence, the path of don't drink alcohol, don't have sex, don't do any of these things, where Tantra was the path of go ahead and do those things, but do them mindfully and within certain limits. Don't go crazy, unless you want to take the left-hand Tantric path and go the wrong way for a while and then find your way back. Like there's more freedom to maneuver on the Tantric path toward enlightenment or mastery or whatever you want to call it. And then the ascetic path of yoga or Buddhism, which I would call more Theravada Buddhism, where the other one is Vajrayana Buddhism. There's both yogic and tantric paths using his terminology within Buddhism in the sense of different forms of Buddhism, right? You've been following this podcast before now, so you kind of understand that. But yeah, so he was Hindu. He was coming from the standpoint that Shiva introduced yoga to the world. And Shiva introduced the path to nirvana, the path to enlightenment. And Lord Buddha, he would say Buddha was imitating Lord Shiva. I would say Lord Buddha, just potato. But anyway, that the Buddha was imitating Shiva. And I remember I mentioned that to Priyal, and she kind of got a little bit upset and was like, well, the difference between Shiva and Buddha is that Buddha was an actual person and Shiva is a myth. And so, people have their strong feelings about these things, and it's a little bit touchy, I don't have a strong, firm, I feel a great affinity for Shiva. When we were married, we were more or less in the role of Parvati and Shiva. As you can see here, I'm here in the role of Shiva during the wedding. So, and I formally converted to Hinduism in order to be legally married in a Hindu temple in India. So, from a certain standpoint, I'm more Hindu than I am Buddhist, and being a yoga teacher and all that. However, I do have a very strong interest in Buddhism and having been raised with a Vajrayana Buddhist practice. So I'm a bit of a mixed bird, you might say, myself, which is probably why that Shiva and Vajrayana symbol resonated for me up at the top of the top of the Annapurna base camp trek, which means the bottom of Annapurna. So it's not the top of anything, really. So that's basically it. I don't know if did you get anything out of that? Here's a little bit of footage of Pashupatanath, which I went to on Shivaratri, which is the one of the days out of the year when you can basically legally have weed, because one of the things about Shiva, at least in one or two of his incarnations, was that he was a fan of he would do it like this, more of this kind of thing, put it in here, and so you're basically allowed to smoke weed or to drink marijuana-based yogurt during Shivaratri, and also during Holi, which is another. I think Holi is related more to Krishna and Radha, but anyway. People are allowed to do that. Basically allowed. The police just don't enforce that law on that day of the year. What else? I don't know. I think I covered everything. I probably forgot one or two things. But, I've gone on long enough with the special guest segment at the beginning of the episode. But like I said, starting in about 4 days, I'm not going to have any special guests with me because I'm not bringing any statues with me where I'm going. So hopefully the reading on its own will be enjoyable enough. Well, should we get to the reading? Why not? Any questions or comments? Do comment below. I got a dislike again, second dislike on the YouTubes of the Buddhist Books podcast. The one that starts out with the clip that it's from the scriptures, by the way. Where it talks about she took one end in her mouth and put the other end on her private parts. Someone saw that and clicked dislike, I guess. So, c'est la vie, as they say. The French, pretentious people say. Forfeiture. Nissaggiya 8. At one time, the Enlightened One, the Lord, was staying at Savatthi in the Jeta Grove in Anathapindika's monastery. At that time, a certain man said to his wife, quote, I will present Master Upananda with a robe. A certain monk who was going for alms heard the words of this man as he was speaking. Then this monk approached the venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, and having approached, he said to the venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, quote, You, Reverend Upananda, are of great merit. On a certain occasion, a certain man said to his wife, quote, within quotes, I will present Master Upananda with a robe, end quote, within quotes, end quote. Quote, Your Reverence, he is my supporter, end quote, he said. Then the venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, approached this man. And having approached, he said to this man, quote, Is it true, as is said, that you, sir, desire to present me with a robe? End quote. Quote, Did I not also think, Master, I will present Upananda with a robe? End quote. Quote, If you, sir, desire to present me with a robe, present me with a robe like this. What shall I do with one presented that I cannot make use of? End quote. Then that man, spread it about, saying, quote, These recluses, sons of the Sakyans, have great desires. They are not contented. It is not easy to present them with a robe. How can Master Upananda, before being invited by me, approaching me, put forward a consideration with regard to a robe? Monks heard that man who, spread it about. Those who were modest monks, spread it about, saying, quote, How can the Venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, before being invited, approaching a householder, put forward a consideration with regard to a robe? End quote. Then these monks told this matter to the Lord. He said, quote, Is it true, as is said, that you, Upananda, before being invited, approaching a householder, put forward a consideration with regard to a robe? End quote. It is true, Lord. End quote. Quote, Is he a relation of yours, Upananda, or not a relation? End quote. He is not a relation, Lord, he said. Quote, Foolish man. Foolish man. One who is not a relation does not know what is suitable or what is unsuitable, or what is right or what is wrong for one who is not a relation. Thus you, foolish man, before being invited, approaching a householder who is not a relation, will put forward a consideration with regard to a robe. It is not, foolish man, for pleasing those who are not yet pleased, yet in parentheses. And thus, monks, this rule of training should be set forth. In case a robe fund comes to be laid by for a monk by a man or a woman householder who is not a relation, parentheses of his and parentheses, thinking, quote, within quotes, I will present the monk so-and-so with a robe, having got the robe in exchange for this robe fund, end quote, within quotes, then if that monk, out of desire for something fine, approaching before being invited, should put forward a consideration with regard to a robe, saying, quote within quotes, indeed it would be well, do let the venerable one, having got a robe like this or that, in exchange for this robe fund, present it to me, end quote within quotes. There is an offense of expiation involving forfeiture. For a monk means, for the good of a monk, making a monk an object, being desirous of presenting to a monk. A man who is not a relation means one who is not related on the mother's side or on the father's side back 7 generations. A householder means he who lives in a house. A woman householder means she who lives in a house. Robe fund means gold or a gold coin or a pearl or a jewel or a coral or a plowshare or a piece of cloth, piece of being in parentheses, or thread or cotton. For this robe fund means for what is present. Having got in exchange means having bartered. I will present means I will give. Then if that monk means that monk for whom the robe fund comes to be laid by. Before being invited means before it was said to him in parentheses, quote, what kind of robe do you want, honored sir? What kind of robe shall I get in exchange for you? End quote, within quotes. Approaching means going to the house, approaching him anywhere, him in parentheses. Should put forth a consideration with regard to a robe means let it be long or wide or rough or soft, end quote. By the way, I mentioned the things that are in parentheses. That might seem annoying, and you might wonder why I'm doing that. It's because in parentheses means it's not actually in the original text, that the translator has added that word to help with the context, just so you can kind of, like, if you're interested in that, know what the words were. as opposed to what English words are added in to help with the context, or to help, clarify. A monk gives a monk a robe. They'll put in parentheses, a different monk, another monk, just to so you're not is he giving himself the robe? No, of course not. If you read it as it is without the parentheses, usually it makes perfect sense. Right? Anyway, for this robe fund means for what is present. Like this or like that means long or wide or rough or soft. Having got in exchange means having bartered. Present it means give it. Out of desire for something fine means wanting what is good, wanting what is costly. If, according to what he says, he gets in exchange one that is long or wide or rough or soft, there is an offense of wrongdoing in the action. It is to be forfeited on acquisition. It is to be forfeited to the order, or to a group, or to an individual. And thus, monks, should it be forfeited. Quote within quotes, honored sirs, before I was invited to take being in parentheses, this robe, approaching a householder who was not a relation, I put forward a consideration with regard to a robe. It is to be forfeited. I forfeit it to the order. End quote within quotes, 3 dots, open quote, 3 dots. Last time we went over what goes in all those dots, right? The order should give back 3 dots. Let the venerable ones give back 3 dots. I will give back this robe to the venerable one. End quote. I'd say don't give it back. Let the order keep it, because the guy already has robes and this fine silk, whatever it is. Why give it back? I mean, really, that's my opinion as one of the congregation here. Anyway, if he thinks that a man is not a relation when he is not a relation, and, in parentheses, before being invited, approaching a householder, puts forward a consideration regarding a robe, there is an offense of expiation involving forfeiture. If he is in doubt as to whether the man is not a relation, and, in parentheses, before being invited, approaching a householder, puts forward a consideration with regard to a robe, there is an offense of expiation involving forfeiture. If he thinks that a man is a relation when he is not a relation, and, in parentheses, before being invited, approaching a householder, puts forward a consideration with regard to a robe, there is an offense of expiation involving forfeiture. If he thinks that a man is not a relation when he is a relation, there is an offense of wrongdoing. If he is in doubt as to whether a man is a relation, there is an offense of wrongdoing. If he thinks that a man is a relation when he is a relation, there is no offense. That part seemed to be a little subtly different from in previous chapters, where it's an offense involving forfeiture. If he's not a relation but he thinks he is, if he is a relation but he thinks he's not, here it's an offense of wrongdoing. So that's interesting. There is no offense if they belong to relations, if they are invited, if it is for another, if it is by means of his own property, if he gets something of small value in exchange while he desires to get something costly in exchange, if he is mad, if he is the first wrongdoer. So that's interesting. If he says, I would like that fine silk robe, and they're like, here's a burlap sack, you can walk around in this, then there's no offense, because he already got punished, I guess. That's fun. Forfeiture, Nissaggiya, 9. At one time, the Enlightened One, the Lord, was staying at Savatthi in the Jeta Grove in Anathapindika's monastery. At that time, a certain man said to another man, quote, I will present Master Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, with a robe. Then he said, I also will present Master Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, with a robe. A certain monk who was going for alms heard this conversation of these men. Then this monk approached the venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans. And having approached, he said to the venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, quote, you, Reverend Upananda, are of great merit. On a certain occasion, a certain man said to another man, quote within quotes, I will present Master Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, with a robe. Then he said, quote, I also will present Master Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, with a robe. End quote, within quotes, end quote. Quote, Your Reverence, these men are my supporters, end quote. Then the Venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, approached these men. And having approached, he said to these men, quote, Is it true, as is said, that you, sirs, desire to present me with robes? End quote. Quote, Did we not think, Master, quote, we will present Master Upananda with robes? End quote, within quotes, end quote. Quote, If you, sirs, desire to present me with robes, present me with a robe like this. What shall I do with ones presented that I cannot make use of? End quote. Then these men, three dots, spread it about, saying, quote, These recluses, sons of the Sakyans, have great desires. They are not contented. It is not easy to present them with robes. How can Master Upananda, before being invited by us, approaching, put forward a consideration with regard to a robe? Monks heard these men, who, three dots, spread it about. Those who were modest monks, three dots, spread it about, saying, quote, How can the Venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, before being invited, approaching householders, put forward a consideration with regard to a robe? End quote. Then these monks told this matter to the Lord. He said, quote, Is it true, as is said, that you, Upananda, before being invited, approaching householders, put forward a consideration with regard to a robe? It is true, Lord, he said. Are they relations of yours, Upananda, or not relations? They are not relations, Lord. Foolish man. One who is not a relation does not know what is suitable or what is unsuitable, or what is right or what is wrong for those who are not relations. Thus you, foolish man, before being invited, approaching householders who are not relations, will put forward a consideration with regard to a robe. It is not, foolish man, for pleasing those who are not yet in parentheses pleased, three knots. And thus, monks, this rule of training should be set forth. In case various robe funds come to be laid by for a monk by two men householders or by two women householders who are not relations of his, thinking, quote, We will present the monk so-and-so with robes, having got various robes in exchange for the various robe funds, end quote. Then if that monk, out of desire for something fine...
I was just thinking about something slick to wrap around my tender throat. I was dreaming like a Texan girl.
Thank you, Annie Lennox. Approaching before being invited, should put forward a consideration with regard to a robe, saying, quote within quotes, Indeed it would be well, to do let the venerable ones, having got a robe like this, or like that in exchange for the various robe funds, presented to me, the two together with one, there is an offense of expiation involving forfeiture. For a monk means, three dots, by two means, by two. Men who are not relations means, three dots, back through 7 generations. Men householder means they live in a house. Women householder means they live in a house. Robe funds means gold or gold coins or pearls or jewels or coral or plowshares or cloth or threads or cottons. For these various robe funds means for these things that are present. Having got in exchange means having bartered. We will present means we will give. Then if that monk means that monk for whom the robe funds have come to be laid by. Before being invited means, three dots, quote within quotes, three dots, what kind of robe shall we get in exchange for you? End quote. approaching, three dots, should put forward a consideration with regard to a robe means, quote, let it be long, three dots, end quote. For these various robe funds means for these things that are present, things being in parentheses. Like this, three dots, present it means give it, both its are in parentheses. The two together with one means two people for one, open parentheses, robe, closed parentheses. Out of desire for something fine means wanting what is good, wanting what is costly. If according to what he says they get in exchange one that is long or wide or rough or soft, there is an offensive wrongdoing in the action. Three dots. So then the rest is the same as part 8, except instead of householder, who is not a relation, it says a householder, it says householders. And instead of a relation, it says relations. Right? Makes sense? Three dots. If he gets something of small value in exchange, while they desire to get something costly in exchange, if he is mad, if he is the first wrongdoer. So presumably in those three dots was, it is not an offense if. And that is the end of Nissaggiya 9. There you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope everyone's doing well. Yes. Oh, I forgot to say that at the beginning I opened with Namaste. This is an ancient Sanskrit phrase which means that light within me acknowledges and honors the light. I'm just kidding. It means hello. All right. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for going on this ride with me. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. I feel like there were things I wanted to mention that I didn't mention about Shiva and about yoga and about Kanchan and about all of that. But if I remember later, then I'll mention it at some future point. All right. I will close now with the prayer which my father taught me when I was very young. Oh, there was one thing that I remember was when I was going through my yoga training in California, the teacher, was saying that you should know and understand that Om is a Hindu thing, not a Buddhist thing, that there's many ignorant people who think that Om is a Buddhist thing. And of course, as I mentioned, that there was some Hindu influence on Mahayana and Vajrayana. Thus, as a result, they say Om quite a lot. And that particular teacher was like, we need to walk on eggshells and not offend, that it needs to be understood that yoga is Hindu. And it's like, that's like debatable, A, and B, it's as much Jainist as it is Hindu, and C, the Tibetan yogis are Buddhist yogis. There's a great book called Tibetan Yoga by my friend Ian Baker. Can I say he's my friend? I interviewed him once, met him twice. Well, anyway, he's someone that I've met twice. I think he might remember my name if he saw me. But yeah, we'll read that book when we get to that shelf. It is on that shelf. I include Ian Baker as part of my scriptures, and he is still alive, so he's an exception to my rule about not having people that are within the past 50 to 100 years having their books in this series. He is the exception. I think I'm out of cards though, so I'm not going to point to anything, but if I'm not out of cards, if you don't see anything pop up there, that means that I am out of cards. But if you saw something pop up, that has to do with Ian Baker. Okay, so now I'll close. All right, I think I've said everything. Not very articulately, but I got it all out there. Okay. To the north and to the south, to the east and to the west, to the spirits of light among us and to the spirits below, we send out our reverent love and compassion. May all beings be happy. May all beings be serene. May all beings be in peace.